Hello and welcome to Relatable Code. In this video, we're going to talk about Kotlin scope functions. So let's get started. When we talk about the scope functions in Kotlin, we're talking about the apply, with, also, run, and let. Okay? We're going to take examples on each because they're pretty much essential for Kotlin developers. Okay, you need to know them because they can really make your code very neat and concise. Okay, and very readable. So let's start here by creating, or let's see what we already have in our library application. I think we have a data class for book, which is, okay, it's a normal class, not a data class. That's fine. We have a book that has a title, an author, and a price. Okay, so let's go into our main function. Let's delete these. We don't need them anymore. And let's create a book like this. Okay, so we have to pass the title, my book title, second parameter author, my book author, and the price, like this. Okay, so how can we use the Kotlin scope functions here? Let's start with the apply scope function. You can use it like this. You can write book dot apply, or before going into details into the apply, let's see why we need it. So let's say I want to modify my title and my author for my book. How would I do that conventionally? I would write book.title equals to new title and book.author equals to new author, and so on and so forth for every single property in my book. Okay, let's comment this out and let's just print line book like that. And here you can see it's a class, not a data class, which is why you see it in that way. Now let's print out these title and author properties like this. Book.title and book.author. Let's run our function. Here you can see new title and new author. And this is how you would change every single property of this book. But here you can see some repetitive code like book.title, book.author. And this is where Kotlin scope functions come into practice. Okay, if you write book.apply like this, you can directly write title equals to new title and author equals to new author, like that. Let's cut this and paste it here, and let's check it now. And here you can see the same result. Okay, the .apply scope function provides you with a neater way of modifying the properties of a data class or what you're basically modifying. Okay, whatever you're calling the .apply on. In my case, I'm calling it on this book, which is a class. Okay, so to avoid writing book.title equals new title and book.author equals new author, you can just directly write apply and you can directly access the title and the author of this, which is a book. Okay, and it's highlighted here, you can see it. This is a very powerful way of writing code in Kotlin. Okay, so the .apply is mainly used to modify the properties of the receiver which is what you're calling the .apply on, in our case, the book. Okay, and keep in mind this word receiver because you will hear it sometime in the future again. Okay, similar to the .apply, you also have a .also function. Okay, but when you call the .also, you need to write it.title and it.author, okay? Because you're not actually directly accessing book, you're accessing it in this context. Okay, you can see it highlighted here, it of type book. Okay, the dot also is not used for the same purpose as the dot apply, even though it can achieve the same functionality. The dot also is more often used to place like finishing touches on this book. Okay, maybe you want to print out some information, maybe you just want to have some callbacks. You will learn more about callbacks in the future. So with the dot also, let's return the dot apply how it was, like this. You would use the dot also for something like print line at dot title, more than modifying the properties of this object. Okay, let's delete this. And here you can see we have new title. Okay, what you can also do, you can chain them together. So you have dot apply here. After the dot apply, you can also call the dot also. And do whatever you want in that dot also block of code. Okay, to place your finishing touches on this book. You can print out the title and you can print out the author. Like that. Okay, and as I've told you, you can modify the properties in the dot also block, but the dot apply is more often used for that purpose. Okay? Now let's talk about the dot let scope function. Let's say you have a function that's called getBook that may return a book or null. Okay, you've seen how to deal with nullable types in Kotlin in this playlist. So let's say in this case, it can either return a book or null. So we have it return null manually. And let's just have our code below that. Let's say book2 equals to getBook. Okay. Now, if I want to access the properties of my book, you can see I have a small error. Okay, right here. You can see that it's written only safe or non-null asserted calls are allowed on a nullable receiver of type book, which means that this book2 may be a book or a null value, and I'm trying to access the dot title property of this book, which I can't do if this book is null. Okay, so what you would do here is you would basically write something like this. Okay. And this works because if book2 is not null, the title is modified. Else, it is not modified, basically. Okay, it takes into consideration that you have a null type. But let's say you have something like this. Let's say you want to assign this to a variable. Okay, so let's say we have book2 title like that. I would write book2 dot title. I would write a question mark here. Okay, but if I do that, my book2 title may be a string and it may be null. Okay, I don't want that because I always want my book2 to have a title, whether this is null or not. Okay, and I can use the dot let scope function here. You're going to see what I mean in this example. So I have val book2 title. I can have book2 like that, dot let, it dot title, and at the end I can write run like this, default title. Okay, so now my book2 title is a string. It can't be null anymore. So if I try to access my book2 title, if for some reason my book2 was returned as null in this example, my book2 title would be equal to this default title, okay? Because when you use the .let scope function like this, if you write book2 question mark .let, as you can see here, the it is a book, okay? It's not a nullable book like this, no. It is a book that's not null, okay? So you're saying if my book2 is not null, I have this block of code executed, and if it's null, I have this block of code executed. So my title would be equal to my book2 title if book2 exists, and if it doesn't, it's equal to default title. Let's print it out. Okay, let's comment out these and let's run our main function. And here you can see I have default title. Why did I get default title? Because this, basically my book2 was null. Because my function for some reason returned null. Okay, so default title was accessed. Let's say my function returned a book. Like this. What do you think would happen in this case? Let's run our function again. And here, book2 title was equal to this value, which was this, because getBook didn't return null. In this case, it returned book, like that. Okay, so when I tried to access it, it was indeed not null, and book2 title was equal to it.title. Okay, that was how you use the .let function in Kotlin. And .let basically just returns the final line of code inside that. Okay, so what I mean by that is if I have print line it.author, here you can see I have a small text which is let. Okay, which means that inside this .let scope, since I'm trying to assign the value to book2 title, the value that gets assigned isn't this whole block of code. It's just the last line in this .let block of code, okay, which is it.title. So if I run this again, like this, as you can see, my author got printed, my book2 title was assigned to this title, which is this one, and it was printed out to my console, basically. Okay, and I showed you this because you don't always get a value from these functions. Okay, especially when you're dealing with books or lists that are coming from the network, for example, from a certain server. Sometimes you have a value and sometimes you don't. Okay, which is why you need to use this .let function so that you can handle the case where you have a value and the case where the value is null. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the with scope function in Kotlin. Let's again comment out this. Okay, let's have this book. Let's use it in the code below. Let's delete this. And here we have our book. Now, how is the with function in Kotlin used? You can use it like this. You write with book. And here, the same thing as the apply function, you have this to work with, which means you have this receiver that you can directly access with its properties, like this. You can have title equals new book title 2, for example. But the difference between the .apply and the with function is that the with function basically returns the last line of code in this block of code, which is this, okay? The .apply function returns the whole book when you're dealing with it. And what I mean by that is, let's say I have val author equals with book author, like that. Let's print out our author and let's run our function again. Here you can see this value, which is author, printed out my book author, which is this one. Okay, and how did this work? Because as you can see in the with block of code, you have this with here, okay, which is trying to tell you that the value that you're trying to assign to this whole thing is the last line of code. The same thing that happened with our .let function. Okay, so when I write val author equals with book, I have the ability to modify the book and return the last line of code in this with block of code. Okay, and that's the difference between the with and the apply function. If you use the apply function here, val, for example, new book, as you can see, you don't have something like this with the dot apply. Okay, and you have here the expression is unused. Okay, and that's the difference between them because when you use the with block of code, you can modify the properties of this object, but the value that's returned is this last line of code. But when you use the dot apply here, new book is just of type book. Okay, but our author is of type string because the last line of code in our with block of code is author, which is a string, basically. Okay, so apply is used to modify the properties of a book and return that book so that you can work with it later. The with scope function is also used to modify this book, but it returns the last line of code in this with block. Okay. And last but not least, we have the .run scope function. And that .run is different from this run function here. We used the run function here just to handle the default case if our book was null. Okay, I'm going to show you how to use the .run scope function. Let's delete this here. Okay, so let's have get book return null again. I'm not using it anyways. So we can write something like get book dot run, like that. Okay, and this works the same way as the with block of code or the with scope function, but the difference is the with scope function doesn't accept any nullable types. Okay, because our get book may return a null type, this has an error now. Okay, so when you use this one, this scope function, the receiver here has to be a non-null type. But if you use the .run function like this, it doesn't matter if it's null or not. Okay, so here I can also directly access title. New book title 3. And here I have an error. Okay, only save. Okay, I get it. You can write it like that. Okay. You can basically access this book if it's null, but what it's saying here is this book may be null, so you can't change the title if this book is null. Okay. So if you write something like this, like that, you can access the title. Okay. I just want to show you the difference between the run and the with block here. And if I write something below it, like this, as you can see, I also have a run here, which means that the run, similar to the with, similar to the let, basically returns the last line of code in that scope function. Okay, we can use it like that. And now let's print out our author2. We have new author because this last line of code was returned for this author2 variable. Okay, and I was able to also access this book, which was a nullable type receiver, which I didn't have the flexibility of doing with block of code, because the with scope function doesn't accept a nullable type. Okay, that's when you use the with if you're sure that your type is not null, and if it may be null, you use the .run scope function. Okay, if you want to modify the properties of some receiver and return that receiver, such as the book, you use the .apply. If you want to add some finishing touches to that receiver, you use the dot also. Okay, and if you're dealing with some objects like this, like we saw, you can use the .let to handle the case that's not null and the case that's null, which is the default value. Okay, and I think that's it for the scope functions in Kotlin, basically. Okay. If you like this type of content and you find it to be relatable, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for future content, and I'll see you in the next video.